The winds sang mournful dirges across the barren expanse, their ghostly wails winding through the skeletal remains of a long-abandoned settlement. Zira crouched behind a shattered wall, her angular form blending with the jagged shadows of the ruins. The air was thick with the metallic tang of decay, sharp enough to sting her nostrils. She ran a clawed hand over the cracked surface of the wall, her fingers tracing deep grooves left by weapons she could not name. Every structure in this place bore such scars, testaments to battles fought long before her time, before even the oldest of her kind had walked the stars. Hunger gnawed at her insides, a relentless ache that had become as much a part of her as her flesh and bone. For days, she had wandered, her dual hearts beating a sluggish rhythm that echoed her dwindling strength. Zira's species, once proud and unstoppable, had descended into this state of wretchedness. It was a cruel irony, she thought, that a race capable of commanding the cosmos could not keep itself fed. Something moved. Zira froze, her senses sharpening as her body instinctively tensed. Her tall, sinewy frame pressed against the wall, the rough surface biting into her back. She peered through a jagged crack, her emerald eyes narrowing against the dusky haze. There, amid the rubble, a faint light flickered, a wavering flame. Her stomach tightened, the sharp pang of hope almost painful. Fire meant heat, and heat often meant life. She shifted carefully, her movements so deliberate they were almost imperceptible. The flame grew brighter as she drew closer, and then she saw it. A figure, seated by the remnants of what might have once been a fountain, bent over the modest glow of a fire. It was a human, a creature she had encountered only fleetingly in her long life. The sight of him was unexpected, jarring even, though her instincts tamped down the shock as quickly as it arose. He was slight by her standards, with pale skin marred by streaks of dirt and sweat. His hands worked deftly, tending to a small steaming pot. The smell drifted toward her, foreign and intoxicating. Her stomach growled audibly, and she winced. The human heard it. He turned abruptly, his eyes wide and searching. Zira remained perfectly still, cloaked in the shadow of the ruined wall. She watched him carefully, assessing his movements. His clothes were torn and scorched, his face lined with exhaustion. This man was no soldier, she concluded, though he carried himself with a quiet resolve. "Who's there?" he called, his voice cracking slightly as it broke the silence. Zira did not answer. Her mind churned. To reveal herself would be dangerous. Humans were unpredictable, prone to violence when startled. Yet the scent of the food pulled at her, overriding her caution with an insistent primal need. The human stood, his posture tense, but not overtly hostile. "I don't have much," he continued, his tone softer now, almost weary. "But if you're out here, you must need help." Help. The word was alien to her. Zira's people did not offer or receive it. To be in need was to be weak, and to be weak was to be unworthy of survival. Yet here she was, crouched in the dust of a dying world, her once impeccable armor dull and dented, her pride as brittle as the crumbling ruins around her. The human returned to his fire, though his movements were slower, more deliberate. He ladled a portion of stew into a small tin bowl and set it on the ground a few paces from the fire. Then he stepped back, his expression inscrutable. Zira hesitated. This could be a trap, though she doubted it. The man seemed genuine in his weariness, his actions devoid of the cunning she might have expected from a potential threat. Her hunger made the decision for her. She stepped out of the shadows, her tall frame emerging like a specter from the gloom. The human's eyes widened, his body tensing, but he did not move. Zira approached slowly, her gaze locked on the bowl. The stew was unlike anything she had seen or smelled before. Its surface shimmered faintly in the firelight, the aroma rich and layered. She crouched beside it, her movements deliberate, her sharp gaze flicking up to the human's face. "Eat," he said simply, his voice low. Zira lifted the bowl, her elongated fingers trembling slightly. She brought it to her lips and sipped cautiously. The taste exploded in her mouth, a symphony of flavors that was at once alien and comforting. Warmth spread through her, easing the ache in her belly and the cold in her bones. For a moment, she closed her eyes. When she opened them, the human was watching her, a flicker of something she could not identify in his expression. Was it curiosity? Pity? She was not certain, and she did not care. "What's your name?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. Zira hesitated. To share her name with a human felt like a breach of some unspoken law, a further erosion of the dignity she clung to so fiercely. Yet she could not ignore the simple truth. He had given her something she could not repay. "Zira," she said, her voice low and measured. He nodded. "Ethan," he replied. The exchange hung in the air between them, fragile yet profound. For the first time in what felt like eons, Zira was not entirely alone, and for the first time, she felt something she could not name, a flicker of hope, faint but persistent, glowing softly like the embers of the fire that warmed them both. The fire sputtered weakly, its flames casting erratic shadows across the desolate landscape. Zira sat opposite Ethan, the taste of the human's food still lingering on her tongue. She stared into the shifting embers, letting the flickering light reflect in her sharp, emerald eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them waited with unasked questions. Around them, the ruins of the settlement stretched out like the skeletal remains of a vast, forgotten beast. Broken spires jutted skyward at impossible angles, their once majestic architecture reduced to jagged shards. The air carried a biting chill, laced with faint traces of ash and ozone. Somewhere in the distance, a mechanical groan echoed, a sound that sent a shiver down Zira's spine. "Not a safe place," Ethan said, his voice breaking the quiet. His gaze swept across the crumbling structures, his expression both wary and resigned. "You'd think we'd know better by now, but humans always find a way to crash where we're not wanted." Zira tilted her head, studying him. His words carried a strange mix of humor and bitterness, emotions she found difficult to parse. Her people spoke sparingly, their language efficient and precise, every syllable loaded with meaning. Humans, by contrast, seemed to fill the air with noise, as if silence were an enemy to be defeated. "Why here?" she asked finally, her voice low and deliberate. Ethan shrugged, poking at the fire with a charred stick. "Didn't exactly pick it, did I? The ship went down, something in the atmosphere fried the guidance systems, barely had time to deploy the stabilizers before I hit the dirt." He glanced at her. "And you? This your home, or just passing through?" Zira's lips pressed into a thin line. The question was simple enough, but the answer was anything but. "Neither," she said, after a long pause. Ethan arched a brow but didn't press further. He leaned back, his silhouette framed by the jagged ruins behind him. "Well, wherever we are, it's not friendly. Those sounds? Machines, probably. Big ones, and not the helpful kind." Zira's gaze flicked to the horizon, where the dim glow of a shattered moon hung low in the sky. Machines. The word carried a weight of its own. Her people had built machines like none other in the galaxy, creations of breathtaking complexity and devastating power. But that brilliance had also been their downfall. Machines did not forget, and they did not forgive. "You've seen them?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "Not yet," Ethan admitted, "but I've read enough reports. Planets like this, where the ground's soaked with old wars, there's always something left behind. Weapons, drones, automatons. Even if the people are long gone, the machines keep going. They don't stop until there's nothing left to fight." Zira felt a flicker of unease. It was true. Her people's machines had been built for one purpose: dominance. They were relentless, self-sustaining, and utterly devoid of mercy. If such relics existed here, then her precarious survival had just grown even more tenuous. "You should leave," she said abruptly, her gaze locking onto Ethan's. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Wish it were that easy. The ship's fried, and even if it weren't, I'm low on fuel. This planet's my home for now, like it or not." His words struck a nerve. Zyra knew what it was to be trapped, to wander a desolate world with no way forward and no way back. Her species had once ruled the stars, their vast fleets blotting out the skies of lesser worlds. And now she was a lone survivor, reduced to scavenging the ruins of civilizations far beneath her own. "I can help," she said, surprising herself as much as Ethan. He looked at her skeptically. "Help? How?" Zyra stood, her movements fluid despite the fatigue that weighed on her. "There are places hidden, storage facilities, armories. My people built them on worlds like this. If we find one, it might have what you need." Ethan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "All right, let's find it." The journey began at dawn, though the light that seeped through the clouded skies was pale and cold. The air seemed heavier with each step, the atmosphere thick with an unseen tension. Zyra moved ahead, her sharp senses attuned to every sound and movement. Ethan followed close behind, his human form surprisingly quiet and efficient. The ruins revealed themselves in fragments, a shattered obelisk here, a collapsed dome there. Each piece told a story, though the language was one of violence and ruin. At times, Zyra could almost hear the echoes of the past, the roar of engines, the clash of metal on metal, the desperate cries of those caught in the crossfire. Ethan broke the silence. "These storage facilities of yours, what exactly are we looking for?" "Survival," Zyra said simply. It wasn't a lie, though it wasn't the whole truth either. These facilities, if they still existed, held more than just supplies. They held remnants of her people's power, power that could tip the balance of survival in her favor. But she kept that part to herself. They reached the edge of the settlement as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep crimson. In the distance, a massive structure loomed, its silhouette jagged and foreboding. "There," Zyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan squinted. "Looks abandoned." "It's not," she replied. As they approached, a low hum began to fill the air, growing steadily louder. Zyra's heart quickened, her instincts screaming a warning she could not ignore. "Stay close," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Ethan's hand moved to the sidearm at his hip. "What is it?" Zyra didn't answer. The hum was unmistakable now, resonating in her very bones. It was a sound she had heard before, a sound that had haunted her nightmares. The machines were waking. The hum rose to a piercing crescendo, filling the air with a sound that was neither wholly mechanical nor entirely organic. Zyra felt it in her bones, the resonance a painful, invasive vibration that seemed to pulse with intelligence. She froze, her tall frame rigid, her eyes scanning the dim ruins ahead. Ethan, to his credit, mirrored her stillness, though the tension in his stance betrayed his unease. The structure before them was massive, an ancient monolith of blackened metal and stone that had been partially swallowed by the ravages of time. Jagged spires jutted upward like broken teeth, their surfaces covered in strange markings, symbols etched with a precision that defied the passage of millennia. The building exuded a presence, a kind of malignant awareness that set Zyra's every nerve on edge. "It's alive," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum. Zyra nodded, her gaze fixed on the dark archway that loomed ahead. She recognized this place now, not from her own memories, but from the fragmented histories passed down through her people. This was no mere storage facility. It was something far older, far more dangerous. "We shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice taut. Ethan shot her a sharp look. "You're just telling me this now, after dragging me across half the settlement?" "Keep your voice down," Zyra hissed. Her eyes flicked toward the archway again. "They'll hear us." "They?" Ethan's hand hovered near his sidearm, his fingers twitching. Zyra didn't answer. She took a step forward, then another, her movements slow and deliberate. The air grew colder the closer she came to the structure, and with each step, the hum seemed to shift in tone, becoming something almost like a voice. Intruder. The word wasn't spoken, but Zira felt it nonetheless, a jagged thought slicing through her mind. She staggered slightly, her sharp claws scraping against the cracked ground. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with concern. "They know we're here," Zira replied, her tone sharper than she intended. She straightened, forcing herself to push through the disorientation. "We need to move quickly. If they wake fully—" A sudden, thunderous clang cut her off, the sound reverberating through the air like a massive iron bell. The ground trembled beneath their feet, sending loose debris skittering down the slopes of the ruins. Ethan's eyes darted wildly, his hand gripping his weapon now. "What was that?" he demanded. Zira didn't answer. She didn't need to. From the shadows of the archway, a massive shape began to emerge. It was a machine, but unlike any Ethan had likely ever seen. Its body was a grotesque fusion of metal and organic matter, its limbs jointed with a precision that mimicked life. Gleaming red lights, eyes perhaps, studied them with a predatory focus. The creature's movements were slow but deliberate, its towering frame exuding an aura of lethal intent. Ethan swore under his breath, raising his sidearm. "What the hell is that thing?" "A guardian," Zira said, her voice grim. The guardians had been designed as the ultimate protectors, relentless sentinels tasked with preserving the secrets of her people. They were programmed to annihilate anything deemed a threat, and time had done nothing to dull their purpose. The guardian stepped forward, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground. A low, guttural growl emanated from its core, the sound reverberating like a warning. "Run," Zira said, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him back. He resisted for half a heartbeat, then followed her lead as the guardian lunged. It moved with terrifying speed, its massive form cutting through the air with an agility that belied its size. They sprinted across the uneven terrain, the ruins blurring around them. Zira's sharp senses guided her, her mind racing as she calculated their best chance of survival. Behind them, the guardian gave chase, its mechanical growls growing louder, more urgent. "This was your plan?" Ethan shouted, his voice strained as he struggled to keep up. "Take us to the killer robot factory?" "Quiet," Zira snapped, her tone clipped. "I didn't know it would be active." The guardian loomed closer, its glowing eyes casting long, ominous beams across the ruins. Zira's heart pounded, her dual rhythms echoing in her ears. She could feel the heat of the machine's gaze, the weight of its intent pressing against her like a physical force. They reached a narrow passage between two crumbling walls, and Zira darted through, pulling Ethan along. The guardian paused, its massive frame too large to follow directly. It emitted a series of sharp staccato clicks, analyzing, recalibrating. "Keep moving," Zira urged. The passage opened into a wider expanse, littered with debris and the remnants of ancient machines. Zira scanned the area quickly, her mind racing for options. They couldn't outrun the guardian forever. It was only a matter of time before it adapted, before it learned how to cut them off. Ethan skidded to a halt beside her, gasping for breath. "You've got a plan, right? Tell me you've got a plan." Zira's gaze fixed on a collapsed structure nearby. Its jagged edges suggested it had once been part of a larger defensive installation. If she could trigger the remnants of its systems, it might be enough to slow the guardian down. "There," she said, pointing. Ethan followed her gaze, his expression a mix of skepticism and desperation. "You think that'll work?" "It has to," Zira replied. The guardian emerged from the passage, its movements slower but no less menacing. Its glowing eyes locked onto them, and its growl deepened, reverberating through the ruins. "Go!" Zira shouted. They sprinted toward the structure, the guardian's footfalls shaking the ground as it pursued them. Zira reached the wreckage first, her hands moving with practiced precision as she searched for an interface. Her fingers found a panel, and she began working quickly, her claws scraping against the corroded metal. "Hurry!" Ethan called, his voice edged with panic. The guardian was almost upon them, its massive form blotting out the dim light of the horizon. Zira's hands moved faster, her mind racing through the fragments of her people's technology she still remembered. Then, with a sharp hiss, the panel came to life. Zyra slammed her hand against the controls, and a pulse of energy rippled outward. The Guardian paused, its movement stuttering as the pulse disrupted its systems. "Move!" Zyra shouted, grabbing Ethan and pulling him away from the structure as it began to collapse. Behind them, the Guardian roared, its guttural sound a mix of fury and frustration. The ruins swallowed it in a cloud of dust and debris, leaving only the echo of its growl lingering in the air. Zyra and Ethan didn't stop running until the ruins were far behind them, the hum of the Guardian fading into silence. When they finally collapsed to the ground, breathless and battered, Ethan turned to her, his face pale. "Next time," he said, his voice trembling, "we're not going anywhere you suggest." Zyra managed a faint, wry smile, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on the Guardian, on the secrets buried in these ruins, and on the growing realization that survival on this planet would demand more than she had ever anticipated. The morning brought little comfort. The air was heavy with ash and silence, the kind of quiet that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to shatter it. Zyra and Ethan had set up a makeshift camp amidst a cluster of jagged boulders. A thin veil of smoke still lingered on the horizon from the ruins they had fled, and though no sound of pursuit had followed, Zyra's instincts told her they weren't safe. Not yet. Ethan sat by the fire, his face drawn and pale. His sidearm lay within easy reach, though the way his fingers twitched suggested he was beginning to doubt its usefulness against the dangers they faced. He glanced at Zyra, who stood a few paces away, scanning the horizon with eyes that seemed to pierce the haze. "We need a new plan," he said finally, his voice breaking the stillness. Zyra didn't respond immediately. Her gaze lingered on the distant ruins, her thoughts racing. She could still feel the Guardian's presence, a phantom weight pressing against her senses. It was out there, somewhere, waiting. She turned to Ethan, her expression unreadable. "I made a mistake," she admitted. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "That place was not what I thought it would be." "No kidding," Ethan said dryly, though the edge in his tone was dulled by exhaustion. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "So what now? Keep running until something else tries to kill us?" Zyra's jaw tightened. She hated this, the vulnerability, the uncertainty. Her people had once commanded respect, fear even, from every corner of the galaxy. Now she was reduced to this, scavenging for scraps, relying on a human for survival. "There's another facility," she said after a moment. Ethan's head snapped up. "Another one? Like the last death trap?" "No," Zyra said firmly. "This one is different, older, hidden." She hesitated, then added, "It wasn't meant for war." Ethan studied her, his expression skeptical. "And you're sure it's still there? That it's not another place with a giant killer machine just waiting to wake up?" Zyra's gaze hardened. "I don't make the same mistake twice." That seemed to satisfy him, or perhaps he was simply too tired to argue. He nodded, leaning back against the rock behind him. "Fine, lead the way. But if we run into another one of those things—" He let the sentence hang, unfinished, but the weight of his words was clear. They set out again as the sun began its slow ascent, its pale light barely piercing the thick clouds overhead. The terrain grew rougher as they moved farther from the ruins, the ground littered with jagged debris and twisted metal. It was as if the land itself bore the scars of the long-forgotten war, its surface broken and battered. Zyra moved with purpose, her strides long and confident, though her mind churned with unease. The facility she sought was a place her people had whispered about in hushed tones, a relic from the earliest days of their empire. It was said to hold the key to something great, something that had been buried for good reason. They reached a canyon by midday, its walls steep and shadowed. Zyra stopped at the edge, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the terrain below. Ethan came up beside her, his breath hitching at the sight. The canyon floor was littered with the remnants of a massive battle. Broken machines lay scattered like discarded toys, Their hulking forms twisted and blackened. The air was thick with the scent of rust and decay. "Another battlefield," Ethan muttered, his voice low. "How many of these are there?" "Too many," Zyra replied. Her gaze lingered on one of the fallen machines, its massive frame half buried in the dirt. It was ancient, far older than the Guardian they had encountered. She felt a pang of something, regret, perhaps, or guilt. Her people had built these monstrosities, unleashed them on the galaxy without a second thought. They descended into the canyon cautiously, the silence around them oppressive. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls like a whisper of warning. Zira's senses were on high alert, her every nerve attuned to the possibility of danger. As they neared the center of the canyon, Zira stopped abruptly. She knelt, her sharp claws brushing against the ground. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice tense. Zyra didn't answer immediately. She ran her fingers over the dirt, revealing a faint pattern etched into the ground, a symbol. It was a circle, bisected by a jagged line, with smaller markings radiating outward. "It's a seal," she said, her voice hushed. "A seal?" Ethan repeated, frowning. "What kind of seal?" Zyra didn't reply. She reached into the pouch at her side, pulling out a small cylindrical device. She placed it in the center of the symbol and pressed a button. The device emitted a faint hum, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. Ethan stumbled back, his hand going to his sidearm. "What are you doing?" Zyra didn't answer. Her focus was entirely on the seal as it began to glow, the faint lines of the symbol lighting up in a brilliant blue. The ground shifted, and with a low, rumbling groan, a hidden hatch began to open. A blast of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of stale metal and something else, something ancient and alien. "What the hell is down there?" Ethan asked, his voice edged with both fear and curiosity. Zyra stood, her expression grim. Answers. But as they peered into the darkness below, a sudden noise behind them made them both freeze. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the pale light. It was humanoid, its form sleek and mechanical, its glowing red eyes fixed on them with an intensity that made Zyra's blood run cold. "It followed us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," Ethan said, his tone laced with dread. "That's not the same one." The new machine stepped closer, and Zyra realized with a sinking feeling that it wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the canyon walls, their movements unnervingly synchronized. They were surrounded. The air was taut with a silence so profound it seemed to press against the skin, broken only by the low hum of the machines as they advanced. Their gleaming, mechanical forms moved with eerie precision, a ballet of inevitability that swallowed the canyon in its wake. Zyra's claws flexed instinctively, her muscles coiled tight, but even her heightened reflexes seemed inadequate against the sheer inevitability of what approached. Ethan stood beside her, his breath shallow, his eyes darting to the hatch yawning open at their feet. His grip on his weapon was tight enough to turn his knuckles white, but the futility of the gesture hung in the air between them. "Tell me you have a plan," he whispered, his voice trembling. Zyra didn't respond immediately. Her gaze flickered from the advancing machines to the dark depths of the hatch below. The ancient seal she'd activated had been a gamble, a desperate play to uncover something, anything, that might shift the balance in their favor. But now it felt like the gamble had failed, the weight of her decision threatening to crush her. "They haven't attacked yet," she murmured, more to herself than to Ethan. "They're waiting for something." "For what?" Ethan snapped, his voice rising. "For us to gift-wrap ourselves and jump into their hands?" Zyra shot him a sharp look. "Keep your voice down," she hissed. "They might not be fully awake." The words hung ominously between them. Ethan exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening as he fought to steady himself. "What's down there?" he asked, gesturing toward the hatch. "Something old," Zyra replied, her voice taut. something my people buried when they realized it was too dangerous to control. And you thought digging it up would help? I didn't expect to have an army at my back, she snapped, her composure cracking. The weight of the moment pressed on her, and for a brief, unguarded second, her weariness showed. Ethan stared at her, his frustration clear, but then he nodded, swallowing whatever retort had been forming. Fine. What do we do now? The machines were closer now, their red eyes glowing brighter as they moved with relentless purpose. Zira's mind raced. Running wasn't an option. The machines would overtake them in moments. Fighting was suicide. That left only one path. We go down, she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. Ethan blinked. Into the ominous death hole? Unless you have a better idea, Zira retorted, already moving toward the hatch. She crouched by the edge, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness below. The faint glow of the activated seal illuminated a narrow ladder descending into the depths. Great, Ethan muttered, his sarcasm barely masking his unease. This just keeps getting better. Without waiting for a response, Zira began to climb down, her movement swift and fluid. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then followed, muttering under his breath about poor life choices. The air grew colder as they descended, the metallic tang of the ancient facility mixing with a faint, acrid scent that burned the back of their throats. The walls of the shaft were smooth and seamless, the craftsmanship a stark reminder of the technological mastery her people once wielded. They reached the bottom after what felt like an eternity. The chamber they stepped into was vast, its walls lined with towering columns that pulsed faintly with light. The floor was smooth, its surface reflecting the dim glow like a still pool. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, its surface etched with the same symbols as the seal above. What is this place? Ethan asked, his voice hushed. A vault, Zira replied, her gaze fixed on the pedestal. A place where we locked away the things we feared the most. Ethan frowned. And you think whatever's in here is going to help us? It's our only chance, Zira said firmly. She approached the pedestal, her movements deliberate. The symbols on its surface seemed to ripple as she neared, their light growing brighter. She placed her hand on the pedestal, and a low hum filled the chamber. The walls trembled slightly, and a section of the floor began to shift, revealing a hidden compartment. From within rose a small, crystalline device, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly light. Zira's breath caught in her throat. That's it? Ethan asked, his skepticism clear. That's what's going to save us? Zira didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on the crystal, her mind racing. This was no ordinary artifact. It was a conduit, a key to something far greater. Help me retrieve it, she said, her voice low. Ethan hesitated, then moved to her side. Together, they lifted the crystal from its cradle. The moment they did, the chamber seemed to come alive. The lights pulsed brighter, and the hum grew louder, reverberating through their bodies. Zira? Ethan said, his voice rising. I think we just woke something up. Above them, the sound of metal on metal echoed down the shaft. The machines were descending. Zira's heart pounded. They had only moments before the machines reached them. She turned to Ethan, her eyes blazing. Go, she said, shoving the crystal into his hands. What? Ethan looked at her in disbelief. Take it and run, Zira said fiercely. I'll hold them off. Are you insane? Ethan snapped. You can't fight them alone? I don't intend to fight, Zira said, her voice cold and determined. I'll slow them down. Now go. Ethan hesitated, his grip on the crystal tightening. Zira! Go! She shouted. Ethan's jaw clenched, but he obeyed, turning and running toward a narrow passage that had opened along the far wall. Zira turned back toward the shaft, her claws flexing as the first of the machines appeared. Her fear melted away, replaced by a cold, focused resolve. If this was her end, she would make it one her people could be proud of. The first machine dropped into the chamber, its glowing eyes locking onto her. Zira bared her teeth in a feral grin. "Come on," she muttered. The machine lunged, and Zira moved to meet it. The air was alive with chaos. Sparks rained down from the shaft above as Zira danced through the machine's onslaught, her movements precise, lethal yet desperate. Each slash of her claws sent shards of metal flying, but for every machine she dismantled, two more emerged, their red eyes burning with unrelenting purpose. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her muscles screaming in protest. This was a battle she couldn't win, not in the traditional sense. She fought not for victory, but for time. Each second she delayed the machines, granting Ethan a greater chance of escape. But even as she tore through her enemies, a part of her couldn't help but wonder, would the crystal truly save them? Or was she sacrificing herself for a false hope? A metallic claw slashed toward her, and she ducked, her instincts snapping her focus back to the fight. She twisted and drove her hand into the machine's core, tearing out a glowing power cell. The machine shuddered and collapsed, but Zira's small triumph was fleeting. The remaining machines paused for a moment, their movements eerily synchronized. Then, as if obeying a silent command, they turned away from Zira and began descending further into the chamber. Her heart sank. They weren't after her. They were after it. With a snarl of frustration, Zira surged forward, giving chase. Her claws tore into the nearest machine, sending it crashing to the ground, but the others ignored her, their singular focus unbroken. She raced after them, her mind racing alongside her body. She had underestimated the machine's intelligence. They didn't just want to kill her, they wanted the crystal, and Ethan had it. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he sprinted through the narrow passageway, the crystal's cold weight a constant reminder of the responsibility he now bore. The faint glow it emitted lit his path, casting flickering shadows on the walls. His thoughts churned with doubt and fear. He didn't understand what the crystal was or how it could help them, but he trusted Zira's desperation. Whatever this thing was, it had to matter. The passage opened into another chamber, this one smaller but no less ominous. Its walls were lined with intricate carvings, their meanings lost to time. In the center of the room stood a pedestal identical to the one above, its surface marked with more of the strange glowing symbols. Ethan hesitated, his eyes scanning the room for threats. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, and a faint hum emanated from the pedestal, as if it were calling to the crystal he held. He approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he couldn't. Not now. As he placed the crystal on the pedestal, the hum grew louder, resonating through the chamber. The symbols flared to life, their light bright enough to force Ethan to shield his eyes. The ground trembled, and a low mechanical voice echoed through the room. Conduit recognized. Activation sequence initiated. Ethan's stomach dropped. Activation sequence? He muttered. What does that mean? The floor beneath him began to shift, panels sliding away to reveal a massive, circular device embedded in the ground. It pulsed with energy, its surface a maze of glowing lines that seemed to pulse in time with the crystal's light. Before he could react, a deafening crash came from behind him. He spun around to see the machines pouring into the chamber, their red eyes locking onto the crystal with a hunger that was almost sentient. "Oh, come on!" Ethan yelled, raising his sidearm. He fired, the shots echoing in the confined space, but the bullets barely slowed the machines. They moved with terrifying precision, converging on the pedestal. And then, Zira was there. She burst into the chamber like a storm, her movements a blur of fury and desperation. She hurled herself at the machines, tearing through their ranks with a ferocity Ethan had never seen before. "Get back!" she shouted, her voice raw. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He retreated toward the far wall, his eyes darting between Zira and the device, which was now emitting a blinding light. The machine's voice returned, louder and more urgent. Final sequence initiated, power transfer in progress. Zira's gaze flickered to the pedestal, and Ethan saw something shift in her expression, a flicker of understanding, of grim determination. "They can't take it," she said, her voice low but firm. "What does it do?" Ethan demanded. "It's a gateway," Zira said, her words hurried. "A bridge to another reality. My people created it as a weapon, a way to escape or destroy our enemies, but we couldn't control it. It's too powerful." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "So, what happens if they take it?" Zira's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw fear in her gaze. "If they take it, this world won't survive." Ethan's mind raced. He didn't understand the full implications of what she was saying, but one thing was clear: the machines couldn't be allowed to succeed. "What do we do?" he asked. Zira hesitated for only a moment before responding. "I'll destroy the gateway." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What? No, you said it's the only chance we have." "It's the only chance they have, too," Zira said, gesturing to the machines. "I won't let them use it. Not again." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say, what to do. But before he could argue, Zira moved toward the pedestal. The machines surged forward, their movements frantic, but Zira intercepted them, her claws slicing through metal and circuitry. She fought with a ferocity born of desperation, each blow buying precious seconds. "Go!" she shouted over her shoulder. Ethan hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to stay, to fight. But deep down he knew she was right. With a heavy heart, he turned and ran, the sound of battle ringing in his ears. Behind him, the light from the gateway grew brighter until it was all-consuming. And then, with a deafening roar, the chamber collapsed, the gateway taking Zira and the machines with it. Ethan stumbled to his knees as the shockwave hit, the ground trembling beneath him. When he looked back, the chamber was gone, replaced by a field of rubble and silence. Zira was gone. And yet, as Ethan stared at the ruins, he felt a strange sense of peace. She had made her choice, and in doing so she had saved them both. The sky above was a pale, bruised expanse, a reflection of the fractured world below. Ethan knelt at the edge of the ruined canyon, his fingers curling into the cold, jagged earth as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. The faint, acrid scent of scorched metal still lingered in the air, a ghost of the battle that had raged just hours before. Zira was gone. The reality of it was a jagged shard lodged deep in his chest, raw and unyielding. He turned the crystal over in his hands, its surface now dim and inert. The once vivid lines that pulsed with energy were no more than faint scars etched into its surface. Whatever power it had held, whatever connection it had forged to that otherworldly gateway, was severed. Ethan let out a slow, shuddering breath. It should have felt like a victory. The machines were destroyed, their purpose unfulfilled, and the gateway, the ominous harbinger of untold destruction, was silenced. Yet the silence felt less like triumph and more like absence. He looked out over the canyon, his gaze sweeping across the desolation. The ruins of Zira's world stretched as far as the eye could see, a graveyard of memories and lost futures. And yet, amidst the wreckage, he could feel the faint stirrings of something else. Hope. But the walk back to the wreckage of his ship was long and solitary. The weight of the crystal in his pack was a constant reminder of the burden he carried, not just of survival, but of the knowledge he now bore. Zira had entrusted him with something far greater than a mere artifact. She had given him a glimpse into the fragility of existence, the delicate balance between creation and destruction. When he finally reached the ship, its battered hull gleaming dully under the fading sunlight, Ethan paused. The vessel was a testament to his own resilience, a stubborn refusal to succumb to the odds. He ran a hand along its scorched surface, his fingers tracing the jagged scars left by the crash. Inside, the control panels flickered weakly, a patchwork of hasty repairs and desperate improvisations. He sank into the pilot's seat, the familiar hum of the systems bringing a faint sense of comfort. He reached into his pack and placed the crystal on the console. For a long moment, he simply stared at it, his thoughts drifting back to Zira's fierce determination, her unyielding resolve. "What now?" he murmured to himself. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Days turned into weeks as Ethan worked tirelessly to repair the ship. The solitude was oppressive at times, the silence broken only by the sound of his tools and the occasional hiss of steam. Yet in the quiet, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. Zira's words echoed in his mind, fragments of conversations that had shaped him in ways he hadn't realized. Her perspective had challenged his assumptions, her resilience inspiring him to confront his own fears. As the ship slowly came back to life, Ethan found himself thinking not just about his own survival, but about the legacy of the planet he was leaving behind. He began documenting everything he could: Zira's story, the machines, the gateway. He recorded it all, weaving her sacrifice into a tapestry of understanding that he hoped would serve as a warning, a guide, for those who might one day stumble upon this world. But the day of departure came sooner than he expected. The ship's engines roared to life, a sound that was both exhilarating and bittersweet. Ethan stood at the edge of the canyon one last time, his gaze sweeping over the ruins. He reached into his pack and pulled out the crystal. For a moment, he hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing against him. Then, with a steady hand, he placed it on the ground, a small marker in the vast expanse of desolation. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice carried away by the wind. He turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. As the ship lifted off, Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions: relief at leaving the planet, sadness at what was lost, and a flicker of hope for what might come. He stared out the viewport, the planet growing smaller and smaller, until it was no more than a speck in the void. Zira's face lingered in his mind, a reminder of the bonds that could form even in the most unlikely of circumstances. Her sacrifice had not been in vain. And as the ship hurtled through the stars, Ethan made a silent promise. He would not forget. He would carry her story with him, sharing it with those who would listen, ensuring that her legacy endured. And the galaxy stretched out before him, vast and infinite. It was a daunting prospect, yet also a reminder of the endless possibilities that lay ahead. Ethan adjusted the controls, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to hope, and as the stars blurred into streaks of light, he whispered a single word, a quiet tribute to the one who had shown him the strength to endure. Zira. The ship disappeared into the void, leaving behind a world forever changed, and a man who would never be the same.